Hi there. All right, you're welcome again to another wonderful edition of Organic Academy. All right, in the past few tutorials, we have been dealing on the four major elements of the local area network. And in the previous tutorial, I talked about the server, the network interface unit. And today we're going to be talking about the third element of the local area network, which is the workstation. Okay. And before I continue, please subscribe to this channel or Gannett Academy. Right here in Gannett Academy, we take on ICT, computer studies, data processing, and also mathematics as well for primary and junior level. All right. So now, workstation. What is the workstation? Now, if you're attentive in my last tutorial where I talked about the network interface unit, I kind of made reference to the workstation as simply being the computer which the user interact with. Okay, that's a simple basic definition of the workstation. Now, workstation is a computer that is connected to the local area network. We're talking about the workstation in the context of the local area network. It's a computer that is connected to the local area network in order to communicate with other resources like shared files and printers that are connected to the what? To the network. Okay, that is your workstation. So in other words, you can look at the workstation as a personal computer. Your workstation can be a personal computer. The workstation can be your desktop, your laptop, okay? As long as a computer that the user interacts with, that is the workstation, okay? It's as simple as that. That is the workstation. Now, that being said, what are the features of, or rather, what are the functions? Let's talk about the functions first. What are the functions of the workstation? Now, number one function of the workstation is accessing of shared files and folders. Remember when I was taking a lecture on server, where I talked about the fact that in a network, you have files and folders that are saved or stored rather in the server and can actually be shared across multiple devices that are connected to the network. All right. So the workstation, one of the function is to access those stored files or those files that has been stored in the server. Okay, and there are different, there are more than one, there can be more than one workstation in a network, of course. And these different workstations have access to the same files that have been stored in a particular server. Okay, so the workstation makes you to see those files, those folders that have been stored in the server. All right, so that is one function of the workstation. Another function of the workstation is printing through network printers. In the previous tutorials, I talked about the fact that in a network, you can actually have a printer, one single printer connected to the network with which different, computing device can interact with. And in the process of interacting, you discover that this computer, can actually send documents or files to that particular printer, and another computer in the same network can still send files to that same printer. You see multiple computing devices making use of a single printer. So another function of the workstation is that it makes it possible for you to be able to print through those network printers that have been placed in the network. It makes it possible for you to print through them in a particular network. Now let's look at also another function of the workstation. Another function of the workstation is applications are hosted on the server. That is, it makes it possible for you to have access to applications that are stored in the server. If you remember very closely or very vividly when I made mention of the fact that you can actually store different applications or softwares in your server. Okay, so now how can you access those applications or softwares that you have stored or saved in your server? It's through the workstation. Okay, so the workstation makes it possible for you to access those files, those folders which you have stored or which has been stored in the what? In the server. That is one very important function of the workstation. Another function of the workstation is it enables the sending and the receiving of emails. Okay, that is one important function of the workstation. And then to add to it, another function of the workstation is that it enables communication with other workstations. Remember I said that there can be more than one workstation in a particular network. Of course, multiple workstations, okay, with different users interacting with what? With them. Okay, so with the workstation, you can be able to interact with another person who is in the same network. Okay, remember in a network you are sharing files, you are sharing folders. Okay, so because of that, someone that is connected to a network or a workstation that is connected to a to a network can actually be able to easily interact. Okay, so a person that is using this workstation and another person that is using that workstation, you will discover that they are almost seeing the same files, the same folders, the same applications, because the things are shared, because they are stored in the server and each workstation is having access to the same server. So with a workstation, you can connect or communicate with different other workstations that are connected to the network. So these are some of the functions of the workstation. Now let's look at the features of the workstation. All right. Now, if you remember, when I was talking or making reference to, or when I was taking a tutorial of network interface unit, I made mention of the fact that the network interface unit can also be called the network interface card, NIC. So we are talking about the features of the workstation. Number one is that it has this NIC. NIC. Well, let me write it very well so that you can be able to see it. Let me write it here. Features. One of the features is that it has a network interface card, otherwise known as NIC. This is one of the features of um, the workstation. This is one of the features. It has a network interface card, always also known as the NIC. Remember the last tutorial when I was talking about the network interface unit, I made mention of the fact that the network interface unit in the context of the local area network is also referred to as the network interface card. Okay, and I showed you what the network interface card looked like. It's a physical device. Okay, it can be inserted, like from the last tutorial I told you that it can be inserted into the server. And from this now you also know that the NIC can also be in the workstation. Just as is in the server, the NIC can also be in the what? In the workstation. So this is one of the feature of the workstation. It has a network interface card. Another function of or feature, because we're talking about feature, we just finished functions. So we are talking about feature now. Another feature of the workstation is that the workstation actually makes use of client-based operating system. Uses client-based operating system. Now, for those of us that are in a business circle, when I'm saying client, you'll be thinking about buying and selling. Well, I don't mean that kind of client in this context, okay? When we're talking about networking, in general, when we're talking about clients, we're actually talking about somebody who is making use of a particular service, okay? So just have that at the back of your mind. Client is, we're not talking about buying and selling now, okay? We're talking about someone that is making use of, a particular service. A service has been provided and somebody is using that service that has been provided. So in the context of networking, that's what client is. Okay, so when we're talking about client-based operating system, we're talking about operating system like your Windows. That's an example. Example, Microsoft Windows. Microsoft Windows is a client-based operating system. Okay, and we also have your Linux. Okay, in Nigeria here we are not very used to Linux operating system. The operating system that is majorly known in Nigeria is your Windows operating system. So I will not be surprised if you do not know this Linux, but Linux is actually a command line operating system initially, but I don't know, but it's like a graphic user interface of this Linux, is coming out. But then many developers, they like this Linux because most of the applications that you want to access there or the tasks that you want to take, you actually do them in the command line. Okay, but I'm not going to go into all of that, but just take note of this feature, that one of the feature of the workstation is it uses client-based operating system. And client-based operating system, an example of that is your Microsoft Windows. You have Linux. And then also the operating system that is majorly used in most Apple products, which is your Macintosh. That is also a client-based operating system. All right. So now, another function of the, another feature of the workstation, another feature is that it identifies an IP address within the network. Okay, the workstation is able to is identified rather sorry the workstation is identified by an IP address. Now, if you remember in the last tutorial which I had on network interface unit, if you remember in that tutorial, we talked about the MAC address, okay, where we made mention of the fact that with your network interface card, the network interface unit actually, identifies each hardware component with a particular address, okay. So this feature of your workstation is that it is identified by an IP address. So what particular element of the LAN actually makes it possible for that addressing is your network interface unit. Okay, so take note of that. So that is one of the feature of your workstation is identified, or rather you can put is identified by an IP address. IP address actually has to do with internet protocol. That's the meaning of this word IP. Okay, take note of that. IP actually means internet protocol. All right. So now let me use this side of the board because this side is already getting filled up. Okay. After this particular workstation, our final class on this series of four major elements of LAN will be communication channel. So stay tuned for that particular video. Now, another feature, let's continue. Another feature of the workstation, another feature is that it can be configured with user account or given access permission. Can be configured with user account or given access permission or user permission. Can be configured with user account or given access permission. What do we mean by that? You have to go back to our video or the tutorial video I made on the server, and then you will see where we talked about the server having to manage the user that have access to that particular network. All right, so so you can look at it as being able to configure different user that can be able to access the different files and folders that has been stored in the server. Okay, so the workstation can actually be configured in such a way that it will determine the user that can have that access to the different stored files and folders in the server. Now remember I said that in a particular network, files and folders can actually be shared in that network. Okay, so take note of that. Those files and folders, they are actually stored in what is called the server. You go to my previous tutorials where I talked about server, and then you will see where we talked about storing files and folders in your server. Okay, so these files and folders can actually be accessed by different workstations that is connected to that particular network. and you can actually configure the workstation in a particular way so that it is going to restrict access to the people who can gain access to such files and folders that have been saved in the server. And this is exactly what this particular feature, because we're talking about the feature of the workstation. This explains exactly what this particular feature of the workstation is talking about. That is, can be configured with user account or given access permission. All right. So now these are the features of the what? Of the workstation. All right. Like I said, the example of the workstation, or a simple example of the workstation, is your laptop, your desktop. Okay? Because when we say workstation, if you look at that word workstation, is actually, a particular point whereby you can be able to do or carry out certain activities or actions. The user can interact with that network. That's why it's given that name workstation. It's nothing but your desktop, your laptop that has been connected to the network. Okay? So next time you hear workstation in the context of local area network, just know that it is your, you know, laptop or desktop that is connected. Take for instance, you have a small office, for instance, because most of the times local area network are actually restricted to um, a small space, okay, within a room, an office, or probably a school's computer laboratory. They want to connect all of the computers that are in the laboratory to a single server. They can actually implement this local area network that we're talking about. So local area network is in a small space, in a small room. Okay, so now take for instance, you want to implement your local area network. How can you be able to access those files, those folders, and different other applications that you have placed in the server? It's through the workstation. Okay, so the workstation is the computers that has been attached or connected, rather, that's the right word to use, connected to the network. Okay, and then the user. Who is the user? The user is you, for instance, that wants to access by using that particular laptop what is in the server. You are the user. Okay, so when I say user, don't get confused that I'm talking about something that is far-fetched. Okay, it's actually the person that makes use of the those computers. You can call it the desktop, the laptop, and stuff like that. Okay, so yes, that is your workstation. Well, that is the end of to do today's tutorial. In the last tutorial in this series of the four major elements of the local area network, we're going to be talking about this guy, communication channel. I want you to look up to that video. It's going to be very interesting because a preview to that video, the communication channel is just majorly the cables, you know, that ensures that this connection is possible. Because when we're talking about networking, we're talking about the connection of one or more computing devices. And when you're talking about connection, there will have to be cables, okay? Because a local area network is not a wireless network. Take note. We actually have a wireless network where we do not have to make use of cables. But in this scenario, we make use of cables. Okay? And since we are making use of cables, those cables or wires, if you like, are what is called the communication channel. So in the next tutorial, we are going to talk about the communication channel. Okay, but meanwhile, if you look below me, you will see the images of the workstation. If you look below right now, this video, you will see different images of the workstation, and you discover it's nothing but your desktop, your laptop, and different other similar devices. All right. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to seeing you again for another edition of Again's Academy, where we'll conclude the series on the four major elements of local area network, which is the communications channel. All right, for my mathematics student, in the coming days, we are going to be, bringing one or two lectures on some various mathematics topics in the primary level, GSS1, GSS2, GSS, because I like taking those classes, those foundational classes. Once the foundation is strong, then you discover that people, they will excel. Okay, so look forward to my mathematics video, and please subscribe to this channel. Bye.